Okay, and it's Monday, July 13th. We are live. Thomas Kopelman. I think I got that right. Kopelman.
You did.
I'm terrible. Okay, good. Man, it's good to connect finally. How are things going?
Yeah, things are really good, man. Enjoying the summer. Excited to hop on and chat with you today.
Okay, well, do we have to put the disclaimer that this is entertainment and educational purposes only out there? Some people do, some people don't. So if we need to, we can.
I mean, I have no idea what we're talking about. I'm not going to give anybody any investment advice today by any means, but hopefully I can give some good financial education.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Listen, if you trust me over a podcast, a live stream, like that's your own fault. Like I don't understand why we have to give these disclaimers, but if you turn on people on a live stream or a podcast and you take their advice just with no context, it should be buyer beware, but whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe unpack real quick who you do work with and who you normally speak with on a daily basis, and then we'll hop into it.
Yep. So my name is Thomas Kopelman. I own an RIA, which is just an independent financial advisory firm, really specializing in two groups. I would say probably 75% of my clients are business owners, mostly generating 1 to 14 million in personal income a year, not business revenue, but personal income a year. And then my other 25% of clients are typically executives, SpaceX employees, people with large capital gain events coming down the line. So we really focus on the whole financial planning side of their life, kind of sit as like an outsourced CFO of their financial life, and then also really own the tax planning side of the world.
Okay. So I mainly work with owners, so we'll keep it more owner focused,
Sure.
but we can't talk about the SpaceX employees. That's fine too.
Perfect.
Um, let's just start with owners because when I talk to RIAs, sometimes I hear them say owners aren't their best clients because they haven't set themselves up for an post business success because they're not investing now. But if they sell, they can invest. But I've heard that. Do you see that with owners? Like they should be investing more now and they're not, or I mean, obviously you're advising them. So when they come to you,
Yeah.
not your current clients, obviously.
I think it's definitely a different world. I think, the RIAs who say they serve business owners, but they're like, we help you set up a retirement account and then we tell you how to invest your personal income. It's kind of missing a lot of the areas that add value for business owners. So, I mean, every business is different, right? There are times in businesses where you are investing back into the business, you're growing the business, you're getting ready for a sale. Most of my clients are very, very high income earners though. So like they have surpluses. Some of my clients are investing millions of dollars per year outside of their business. Other people, a little bit less. They're just using retirement accounts. So I don't necessarily think they're good or bad clients in that way. I think they're good clients because they understand the value of outsourcing. They understand the value of like, hey, my job is to grow my business. I want to have other people do the other parts and kind of hire it out so I can spend my time there. So to me, they're actually the best clients because they value their time. They value an expert kind of being in their corner. I also think I kind of have a unique advantage to be able to help guide them on the business side too. So it's not just like, what money do you have outside the business? Let me help you on. It's like, what are we doing at the business? What's the entity structure? How are we planning for a sale? How are you paying yourself to minimize self-employment taxes and maximize QBID? What are the right retirement accounts? Do we have a buy-sell agreements? What are the right insurances? Like, can we get all the money out of the business? Are we investing in the business versus out? How are we maximizing the yield for the cash you have? What's the right amount of cash you have? Like, there's just a million decisions inside of the business and outside of the business. And I just think financial planning for business owners is the same as financial planning for the business because they go together. You can't just advise on one because, let's say they had $1 million they're holding their business as emergency fund. How they invest, what cash they hold, what things they do is very different than somebody that doesn't have that inside of the business.
Well, you mentioned kind of the outsourcing mentality. I think that the owners that I've seen that have been the most successful are the ones who start to realize, oh, I need an attorney that does this, or a CPA that does this, or a CFP, or an RIA, or whatever. They begin to realize that the ones who don't, they kind of limit their ability to grow. It's hard to grow a company like this. People say, oh, to scale. Okay, that's tough. But you make it really hard on yourself if you don't bring in those outside resources. And so the mentality that you speak of that they're willing to outsource, I think is probably one of the most common things I've seen that show me that the owner can be successful at a high level.
Yeah. I mean, I think about it like in my business, I have, a full-time planner that also is a tax planner. I have a full-time director of operations. I have a outsourced compliance person. I have somebody to help edit my videos and distribute my social media, blah, 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 right? Like I have all those people. I could do all those roles, but what I know I'm best at is growing my business and advising my clients. Everything else should be outsourced because if I'm spending 5 hours extra a week editing my podcast, that's significantly less clients I can meet with. I make way more money advising a client than I do, editing a podcast. And so like when I talk to business owners, I think the ultimate goal for every business owner is to, obviously enjoy what they do and have a great business and help people, but it is to maximize their wealth. And so a lot of times they think maximizing wealth is reducing costs, when in reality, maximizing wealth is one, like increasing profitability and where is your time best spent? It's minimizing taxes, right? Like this is the most controllable one. It's like, what are the things that you're doing to minimize tax? And people, I have business owners all the time that don't realize that. Another one is growing your wealth, right? So I have business owners. I have one in my mind who has like $9 million in cash. He just keeps sitting in cash and all he wants to do is talk about tax planning. And I love the tax planning. We're doing amazing tax planning for him. But I'm like, you don't realize like you paid like $400,000 in tax on interest last year.
Right.
Like you could be minimizing that through a bunch of things. You're also not growing it. The market is outpacing what you're doing. So yes, reducing tax to maximize your wealth is important, but so is growing your money. So there's just like all these different lenses and layers to kind of have your financial life run in the most efficient way.
So one thing, are you familiar with the Bezos one-way, two-way door
framework? I don't know if I am.
Okay, so in short, kind of the one-way door is if you go through this door, it's a one-way door, and it's really hard. You might not come back. So if you're a company in Texas, you buy a company in California, it might crumple your business. It could skyrocket it, but it's a big risk. The other is a two-way door. You walk out the door, you come back. Like it didn't go good, you just come back. No big deal. And his point is that when he was at Amazon, a lot of what he had to do was make sure that the one-way door decisions, he was really focused on that. The two-way door stuff, he didn't really worry about because if it failed, just come back through. No big deal. But investing, I'm wondering how you would think about that framework, because you mentioned the guy with cash, you look at like stocks and you look at bonds, you look at investing in companies. So is investing a one-way door or a two-way door? Because I think a lot of owners, they get hamstrung. They don't outsource, but then they don't really think about the fact that a lot of things is really two-way doors, but you got $9 million in cash, you lose that. That's a lot of money. So how should you think about investing?
Yeah, I think as a business owner, you should think about most investments as a two-way door, right? Because like most things, right? Like, okay, I put my money in the stock market, I put my money in bonds, I put my money in savings, whatever. Like if I ever need that money, I do have the ability to get it back. Sure, you don't want to be a forced seller and be at the worst period of time, which is why, we have emergency reserves in the business and external, and maybe why somebody who is pretty risk averse might have a risk averse side of their portfolio. But where I steer a lot of business owners is away from things that are a one-way door, which is really a lack of liquidity, right? So like a lot of business owners want to get in a bunch of real estate, or they want to get into a bunch of private investments, or they want to buy into other businesses. And all of those are really good until you remember that like the reason why most business owners fail is because of lack of cash flow. And so if we're putting money in areas that are liquid, we set ourselves up for issues down the line because we can't fund the main business, which is where we should be making the most of our money. So I think about, for the average business owner I work with, I have clients who they have $200 million of value in their business. And that might be 99.9% of their net worth. They still might have $1 million or a few $1 million and invest in the stock market. But your net worth is so tied and concentrated in an illiquid market as it is, that the rest of your portfolio should not be doing that. I think over time, as you sell or your portfolio gets really big, sure, you can carve out some areas for privates and alts and things like that. But in general, it's not the starting place. You don't need to go buy rental properties as a business owner. Like, sure, maybe over time there are a place for them. But, I think about your investment should be one, liquid, and two, not occupy your mind, right? When you're buying a bunch of rental properties and you're getting calls at night, or stressed because, big expense comes, or stressed because there's a vacancy, right? Like that's taking your mind away from the best investment you possibly can make, which is in your business. So I always think liquid and something that is passive, and real estate's not passive.
Well, and that's a good reminder. I would guess that you would say the same for a business owner or an employee, that your concentration of your wealth is in your job or your company, because we're just one person until you get to a certain spot though, right?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I stay in the business owner or maybe even sales lens is because like you can directly increase your income by what you do, right? The regular employee is like politics, right? Like I'm killing my job, but they're not paying, there's a max I can make, and it takes this amount of years to get here and here and here. So maybe you do have a little bit of room, but like as a business owner, I'm like, I could work 40 hours a week. I could work 60. I can work 80. I can work 100. My income has been doubling almost every single year for the last 5 years. If I take time and say I lose 40 hours on real estate and that real estate yields me 20 grand, I know 40 hours for me is going to yield me more than six figures in my business. So why would I be spending my time there when it's better here? I do think you can equate it to the employee too, because it's like, keep your foot on the gas, keep learning, keep getting better, keep improving. And by doing that, you will grow your income. It's just a little bit less tangible than like, I know every month based on my input and bringing on new clients that my income goes up every single month. You could be an employee and it could be years before that output is really recognized and go up. But I still think it's good advice.
Well, I think, I agree with that. Your point about the owners and how they could do stuff. I guess what I'm curious is that I've talked to a lot of owners who are you familiar with the SBA kind of range, the 5 million of enterprise? Okay, so SBA range for the listeners is 5 million of enterprise value and less. I've talked to probably 350 to 400 owners the past few years about exiting. So a lot of them are in that SBA range, just because that's just what most businesses are. A lot of them, though, I've noticed that they get to that 60, 65, 70-year-old range. They're ready to exit. They haven't built the business to where they can get retirement money, and then they haven't saved enough so they can shut the doors down. And that seems to be an issue. It's like, guys, I'm always hesitant to be like Hormozy will say, it's hard to get to 10 million, might as well get to 100. Okay, I get what he's saying, but I think a lot of owners, they would be better off just sitting down and going, how much do I need to retire? And then figuring out, can they grow the business to that or sell a business for that? And it seems like a lot of owners that I've come in contact with, I'm not in the same world as you, though. That's why I'm asking. I'm curious. They wait too long to have this conversation, and they think that the business is going to be worth more than it is. And it's just not, which is really sad to tell people.
I think that's extremely normal. I mean, I love the few of the points you made there. I think one of them is that people don't even know what their business is worth or if it's worth anything, right? There are a lot of people who just have jobs, but they're a business owner, right? Like, financial advisors are a unique one where like, I really have a job as a great financial advisor, work with a lot of clients, but because the clients are so valuable and so sticky, it's a sellable business. But if I was a marketing, agency, for example, and it's just me and maybe like one person in the background, in the contracts are 6 to 12 months, I don't really have a sellable business because people just wanted to work with me. So I think first step is understand, like, do you have a sellable business? And is your goal even to sell the business? Because if your goal is to sell the business at a certain time frame, the way you run the business is different, right? Like sellable businesses mean you can extract yourself from that business and it's going to continue to run and have value. Yes, you might stay on for a couple of years, train somebody, build them up, blah, blah, blah. But like, you need to be able to have a business that runs without you. Perfect example is like, can you go on vacation and be away from work for 1 week, 2 weeks, a month? If the answer is no, your business is probably not sellable. And if it is, it's not going to be sellable for as much as you want. But if you do want to go down this sellable route, like you got to run your business differently. You shouldn't be putting all your personal expenses through it. You should be focusing on like, how do I build up this business, take myself out, focus on profitability? So my last 3 years profits look really good, continuing to grow, client revenue, long contracts, like those things make it very sellable. But I think the other thing to consider is like, what if I can't? Because I think people bank on it, but we can see technology is changing super, super, super quick. You don't know if your type of business is going to be sellable in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. So the last thing that you want to do is say, I don't take any of this money out of the business, or I'm only reinvesting back into the business, or I'm spending all the excess money on my lifestyle. Then you get to a point where you're hoping to sell and it's just not a reality. And you're like, shoot, I shot myself in the foot.
Well, and so I know there's a lot of nuance here. And a lot of factors. My guess, if let's say for the owners under 60, okay, because over 60 can be a little bit different, but under 60, if your company's worth 15 million, you don't have a lot of debt, you're basically going to cash out for 15 million, more or less, that's a safe number for retirement for most people in America, downtown New York City, downtown LA, maybe not, but for most of America, 15 million, that's a safe number. Was that a safe way to think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so for the average person. Obviously, like, is your base is zero in the business, your base is 5 million.
Sure.
Are we doing direct indexing and generating capital losses to offset some of the sale? Or some of my clients buy short-term rentals in the year of the sale to help offset some tax. Like, there's a bunch of cool tax things that we can do to help offset it. But let's say, even in California, you're paying 37% tax on it. So you're taking home, let's call it a little bit under 10 million. That's $360,000 to $420,000 a year in yearly spend. You're probably in a pretty good spot there. I think most people, what I find is most high earners are spending in this like 30 to 50,000 a month range. But ideally, if you're retiring in your 50s to 60s, you've kind of paid off the mortgage with this, and you can get into that 350 to 450,000 range. So I would say that that should put you into a pretty good spot. If not, then maybe you sold too early.
Well, and it's more of a for owners to think about as they're looking into this. They need to speak with someone like yourself, obviously, but also when we talk about enterprise value, like I think the most frustrating thing is talking to owners who they don't really realize we're just playing a game. That's all this is. It's just a game. And what game am I playing? And so am I playing the game for 15 million or 50 million or 75 million? And there's rules more or less to these games. So what is the game I'm playing? And I think for a lot of owners, if they just understood, okay, hey, if I could sell my business for this much money, have this much invested, understand this plan, that's the game I'm playing. Then they could actually play that game. They don't know what game they're playing, and so they end up kind of losing, for lack of a better term, because they never played the game.
Yeah, you haven't thought about what's the taxes going to be, what's left over, how much do you really need to be able to retire or be work optional. But I also think playing the game is also like, am I building a C corp? Yeah, that's funny. 37% tax rate. California, you pay 20 Fed, 3.8% net investment tax, and then you could pay all the way up to basically 14.3. So people a lot of times think I sell my business, I pay 15% capital gains taxes, and you phase out to 20 in net investment tax pretty quick. So I think that's an important thing for people to know. But back to playing the game. I think the interesting thing about playing the game is like, I'm playing the game of max profits, right? Like to me, how, like, I'm like, okay, great. I 2 years ago profited 700, last year, 1.4, this year, close to $2 million, right? Like I would much rather play the profits game, maximize that, enjoy my life today, invest as much as I can, build liquidity. And maybe in the future I sell, but right now that's not the goal. Other people are, C Corp, tech, you're losing money, you're raising, you're going for a future sale to retire. And so like, knowing what game you're playing is important, because to me, I could build and bring on other advisors and I could give them clients. I could make some money off of them. But like, to me, that's not the game I want to play. I want to just grow the business, work with the top level clients, continue to kind of graduate up, send some people out of my firm, fill them with higher level clients, make as much money as I can, have a little bit less clients, and do that for as long as possible. Because a lot of owners are like, I got to sell. And I'm like, you're selling for 3 times profit this year, and your profit's going up 20% a year. Like in 5 years, what you're selling for would be 1 year's income if you stay on this pace. Do you really want to sell today? Do you really want to take this discount relative to like what you're getting at? I have other clients who they sold for 10x profit. Okay, well, that's pretty hard to turn down, because that's really hard to get to. You have a 2-year non-compete. You could go build a business after that. But when you're in this 2 to 4x profit range, unless you really want out, it's like, is that really the best decision? Because people just like see money and they're like, well, that's cool. Somebody offered it to me. Like maybe I have to take it, and you don't.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of gets into that SBA range and out of the SBA range, because you get out of the SBA range, the multiples are a little bit better. You can look at, and then obviously the top end of SBA, you're gonna get some PE, but obviously the PE gives you different options as far as how you might get second by the apple, stuff like that. But again, yeah, I think you said it well. You don't have to build a sellable business. You got to understand that's just the game you're playing. Like, okay, I'm playing that game, and that means I've got to invest a certain way. And I think this is the thing that it's like, okay, hey guys, we've got to, and it's really weird, because when I talk to other consultants on this side of the table, we all kind of say the same thing. We talk to the owners, they're like, well, I'm not too sure. It's like, no. It's not that. Okay, we all have something we're trying to sell you. I get that. But also we see this, the stories. Like I was telling someone this earlier today. I know a company, and I can't remember the exact number. It's been a few years now. They were either 90 or $100 million. That was in 2023, I think. They're bankrupt now. And they wanted to sell because the partners were fighting, but their margins were terrible. So their valuation was like 15 million or something like that. So they played a game and got to almost 100 million in revenue. But they couldn't sell for hardly anything because they didn't play the game the right way, which is to say maximize value, all that stuff. And so think about that, 100 million of revenue, and you can't sell but for 15 or 20 million or whatever it was. It was crazy. And they were bankrupt.
There's good and bad businesses to run. Like I love the business that I get to run, because it's a pretty easy business to run in all reality. Sure, there's compliance and hard work and blah, blah, blah. Like then I look at people who run, like we build huge buildings and we have 100 million in revenue and we make 900K. It's like one thing goes wrong and that business blows up. Like I'd much rather run a business that has 1.2 million in revenue, but $900,000 of profit. Like in all reality, that's the truth. And so I think there's a lot of people who want to become business owners. And what I found is really the best business owners are people who are, when you, especially service businesses are some of the best business to run. It's normally, I'm really good at this job. My company is not the right place to be. I'm just going to go start my own. I never wanted to do this, but I fell into it. Those are a lot of times are the best businesses to run. Then there's the sexy tech businesses. Those are the easiest businesses to fail, right? Most of those businesses fail. You take on a lot of capital. You don't really make it. And then there's the construction and other ones that they're just hard, right? Like you can go through such hard times. And I think when people think about what game to play, think about the right type of business, the one that's going to be the best to run, the one that you're going to enjoy the most, because it's hard building businesses. It's hard running businesses. If you hate it, you're really not going to make it. And be really careful with franchises. I'm sure a lot of people don't like to hear it, but I have one client who has a ton of franchises and has done really well. Every other client that's ever done a franchise has lost close to $1 million and wish they never did it.
Yeah. I know someone right now very successful with a franchise, but I've talked to a lot of owners, and man, you have to really understand what the franchisor is going to help you do. You really need to make sure that they're going to deliver on that, because if not, it's hard enough to run a business, and then you got to meet these franchise requirements and stuff, and you get no support. It becomes a nightmare. So yeah, I've seen a lot of horror stories there as well.
In general, to me, I'm like, if it's that great of a business that you want to be in, wouldn't they just run it and have it be profitable? I think about that, somebody will be like, hey, I got offered this amazing investment and it's supposed to be this. I'm like, how did it make it to you if it's so amazing, right? All the billionaires passed on it, all the 100 millionaire people, and it made it to you, who's just kind of like an average person. They need your 50K. In all likelihood, it's probably not that great of an investment, because think about how many people had to say no. And, I think there are some Chick-fil-A, great franchise, right? Those are individual people own, they do really well. You work really, really hard. But in general, franchises to me are just why did the person who started this, why aren't they just launching them all themselves if it's that good?
Well, I think you said Chick-fil-A. We can all walk into a Chick-fil-A and go, this is really well ran.
Yeah.
And so then you go, oh, it's a franchise. Okay. Yeah, I want to buy this. Where if you walk into Burger King, you might go, oh, that's a franchise. I don't want to own that. Yeah. I don't know. They might print cash. I don't know. But there's another one. There's one. Is it Racetrack? I was reading a book about them and how they run their, that was a Racetrack. Anyways, and that they're pretty serious about how they run. I can't remember if they have a franchise model or not, but again, it's kind of one of those things okay, if they had a franchise model, I could see that being very, very helpful, because they are serious about training their owners, their staff, same as Chick-fil-A is. And so you're right, but you really have to look at this. If it's a new startup franchise, I would probably run for the hills on those. Those seem pretty dangerous.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so I had someone on the other day, and he had exited 3 exits, and he said for him, when he's thinking about exits, he kind of looks at it as a binary choice. If you have enough from this exit to retire, you can work again, of course, but you don't have to work again. Then he said you should sell. Now he was an owner. Now you are on the opposite side. You're kind of the advisor, saying, well, maybe you should keep it, maybe not. How do you walk through that framework? Because I think it'd be helpful for owners to hear someone who's on a different side go, well, maybe you should keep it, maybe not. Is it binary? If it's 15 million, just use that number. Go ahead and sell it if you can, or not.
I definitely don't think it's binary, but I think it's actually a good way to start the conversation, because long story, I had a client that I was working with who they built a really, really great business. They, this guy was in his late 80s, not in great health. He always wanted $80 million from the business. Not a big spender, plenty wealthy, no financial issues. He's getting offers for $74 million. Ended up not taking it because he couldn't get to 80 million. And the whole thing was you're old, you're in bad health, you work all the time, you don't have the time to focus on your health. And because you have some random arbitrary number in your head that means nothing, you didn't take it. And now you're back to the drawing board, you're working a bunch of years. And, I think there's this part that people just have random numbers in their head that feel like they made it, right? When people sit down with me, they're like, my goal is 20 years from now, I want to be worth 25 million bucks. Okay. Why? Because that's just always the goal. Okay. But you spend 200 grand, right? If you think about it, you would need, they're like, well, I want to double my spending. Okay. So you need about 10 million. So why 25? And they've never dug into it. They just have these random numbers that feel like success to them. And I think that's way more dangerous than saying, hey, here's my life today. When I retire, I want to buy a second home. I want to make sure I can travel at $50,000 a year, blah, blah. Here's the number I need. Okay, great. Now, if somebody approaches me and they give me that sale value, it's at least worth considering. It doesn't mean it's a for sure yes, because maybe they approach you and you're like, I'm not ready. We're killing it this year. I think I have a couple more years of doing a few things and I can grow that. But I think having that number is really important, because you can't even evaluate sales at that point, because then somebody comes to you, you needed 10 million, they offer you 5. I recently had a client last year who he's like, partner wants to buy me out for $4 million. And I'm like, okay, 4 million gets you 2.5. You have no other investments. You have 2.5. Right. You can live on 100K a year. You spend 700 grand. What are we going to do? What would your job be? Yeah. He's like, yeah, I don't know. I've been doing this my whole life and I'd have a non-compete. I'm like, so why are you? He's like, it's just a lot of money. I need to evaluate. I'm like, but it's nowhere near what you need. Like, you didn't build this business to sell and not be able, like, you're trying to build a new house, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. So we had the conversation, was like, you would need at least 10 million for it to even consider it. You could pay off some of the real estate you have. We could increase cash. We could do some things. 4 million is nowhere close. Like, you're years and years and years away. And, some people would just take that offer because they hear a $4 million number, and then you instantly regret it because you're like, how am I going to build back to making 900K a year in some other way? Like, maybe I could, maybe I couldn't, but maybe I make 0 the first year, and then 200, and then 400, then 500. And you basically spent all 4 million on your yearly expenses trying to get back to there. Probably wasn't the best choice. But I would say not binary. You don't automatically sell because you can retire. Because what I found is that most business owners don't retire, to be honest. Like, all of my business owner clients that sold, they didn't make it 1 year. They were back to building something different right after. So, like, sale isn't only about retirement, but sometimes you do have to take a really good offer, and maybe it's at the right time.
Well, what I've told people is, to your point earlier about owner dependency, if you're at a spot to where you can get that number that you could retire, and I'm not saying retire in the sense of you don't have to show up anymore. You could. Then theoretically, you've built a business that allows you to start planning for that next phase. So that could be charity work, could be a new business, whatever it is. And so then you go to market, you go to sell, and you sit out for a year, but you're ready for phase 2 because you've done that. You've kind of planned for that. And so, going back to what you said a minute ago, about your client that couldn't get the number he wants. I think that's also, like, I had a client, and great business. Well, he has one client, he nets $2 million a year. Okay. Well, he wants to sell for $8 million. Well, the problem is it's not worth $8 million. It's worth like 2. Okay. Well, for him to diversify customer concentration to get $8 million from an exit will take a long time. And then it'd be worth a lot more than $8 million. So it's like he'd have to cut that client back, get other ones, or just grow the business. And so, but at the end of the day, if he just plays it right for 3 or 4 years, he'll have $8 million in his pocket. Instead of selling, sometimes it's just like, just do this for 3 or 4 more years, and you're in that spot. So it's going back.
Could you hire yourself out, right? Could you bring on somebody for 200 grand to run this one client, and you get to make $1.75 million without doing much? Might be better than selling for a business, you're right, that is not super sellable.
That's why I've told him that multiple times. I said, for 400K, which is well above what you need where we're at, but for 400K, you could probably never answer the phone again. And so, but I think that ties into, as far as the M&A side of things, I think a lot of owners, they're okay with problems in the business that prevent their valuation from getting high when they're in the business. But when you hire someone and you've got one customer, you got to be sure that person never leaves and takes that one customer away. And then you start to think of it as a buyer does. Like, right. So this is why, to your point earlier about removing yourself from the business, it's odd. It just creates so much more value because you have to fix these things. Like, you wouldn't have a business that nets $2 million and have one person talk to the client, because you'd be afraid that they'd be gone. And when they're gone, they might take your client and your business is gone, which is why a buyer won't pay anything for it. So I'm sure with investing, though, I'm sure there's a lot of things. I think David Bonson has a quote that most of the time he spends is telling people what not to do. Like, don't panic, don't sell. Is that what you've seen as well? Like, don't panic.
Honestly, I don't have much of that issue. I think we spent a lot of time on education in the beginning about like, here's what the markets do. It's, might average 8 to 10% a year. It's never around that. You are going to have plenty of recessions in the next 20 or 30 years. Here's what the average recession looks like. Here's what the average bull market is like. Here's why bull markets are significantly stronger, blah, blah, blah. I think most of the time is spent on like, okay, cash flow. Like, what is the leftover money we have monthly, quarterly, yearly? What type of accounts is it going to? Are we maxing solo 401ks or regular 401ks? Are we adding cash balance plans? How are we doing our backdoor Roths? What's going to taxable? And a lot of it for business owners is we know we're having a sale coming. So with our taxable investments, why are we buying the S&P 500 or total US stock market when we can do direct indexing and start to kind of harvest these losses coming into a sale? I have a lot of clients who sell first business and we do the same thing. So maybe they're going to have earnouts. So now we have direct indexing. Direct indexing offsets some of the sale plus some of the earnouts and prepares for sale number two. I mean, you basically get the same return as the stock market with, on average, 40% of the account value and losses per decade on long only direct indexing. Long short, you can get 170% potentially in 10 years. And so you minimize that tax drag, right? So that person who's going to sell for 15 million, could they have for the 10 years leading up invested 4 or 5 million from their profits and end up offsetting anywhere from 2-3 million of the sale? Now, California, right? 3 million of your sale offset, you're getting close to $1 million that doesn't go to taxes that gets to reinvest and compound for a long period of time.
Okay. So you dropped a bunch of terms there. And if I'm, okay, I'm sure some people are going, oh man, that's really complicated stuff. How complicated is this? Is it really simple? Like this, okay, you said a bunch of fancy words, but buy the indexes, or is it really that sophisticated where you got to figure out what to do?
Yeah, so it's instead of like, for example, instead of buying the S&P 500, when the S&P 500, you own one ETF, but you own all the holdings underneath, right? So if NVIDIA drops 20% and it was 8% of the S&P 500, now it might be, just under 7%, for example. So instead of that, you own those individual stocks that make up the index. Generally for the S&P 500, like 300 stocks that make it up. So what happens is last year, the S&P 500 ends the year like up 20 some percent, but 40% of the stocks in the index were down. So at the end of the year, you put $1 million in, you end at 1.2 when you own the S&P 500. If you own the direct index, $1 million, you end at 1.2 million, but you might end up with somewhere around like 12% of that account value in losses, like 120K in harvested losses, but a similar return. So all of a sudden the next year, you have a private investment that pays out 150 grand, 120 of that is offset. So instead of saving for taxes, you get to reinvest that money and not have the same tax drag. And so there's like so many lenses of what real tax planning is, but minimizing the tax drag and not paying taxes when you're in your highest income earning brackets to potentially defer them to the future is super important. Or maybe you never sell. Maybe your kids get a step up in basis. You can also take all these stocks and seed them into a new ETF and get one share. You can donate things to charity over time with low basis and avoid the capital gain. There's just so much that you can do there, but minimizing the tax on the sale is really important. So that's not just QSBS planning. It's not just building basis, QSBS stacking. It's also harvesting losses, long, short, direct indexing in that year, right when the sale happens, et cetera.
I was just going to ask about QSBS because I've talked to owners about that, and it's one of those things. Don't call me for QSBS. I got people I can send you to. You might be a QSBS expert. I don't know that, but it's a serious thing that you can pay zero tax. If you sell, you hold it for 5 years, and I think there's a 3-year 30%.
It's a new rule. Yeah. Now it's 15 million, three years, you get 50%, 4 years, 75% of that, 5 years, 15, or it's 10x your basis. So maybe you're doing an S Corp to C Corp conversion and you have 3 million of basis in your company. Now you have 30 million of QSBS eligibility. You can also add different trusts. You could have a SLAT, which is a spousal lifetime access trust that can stack another one. You have a trust just for your kids, stack another one. The downside of the C Corp is it the right tax structure? And are we going to hold it long enough? What's the sale value? Because you're going to pay more tax. So if you're me, and let's say I have a business that's going to profit $2 million and I'm in an S Corp. Okay, well, I minimize the self-employment tax. It flows through to me. I can pay the state taxes through the business. If I was a different type of business, I could also get the qualified business income deduction. But the C Corp on that side, you pay 21% corporate tax rate, and then you pay long-term capital gains tax to get it out. So it's less tax efficient. So we have clients who it's like, okay, you're going to pay $300K, $500K, $700K more a year in tax to be a C Corp. But if you get 15 million in 5 years at 37%, right, you might come out ahead by 3-4 million. So you really do need to look at the numbers because it's not obvious. And it's also, not every business gets QSBS, right? It's basically, are you a tech firm? Are you create something unique where you're being bought for that unique creation, mostly tech. If you're a service business, you're not going to get it. If you're a real estate firm, you're not going to get it. If you're a restaurant, you're not going to get it. If you're a financial advisor or lawyer or CPA, you're not going to get it. It's really generally like, are you building some piece of tech? So some clients, service business, but they might have a specific tech. So that might actually be carved out separately. And that might be sold. That might be a C Corp. This might be an S Corp. Entity formations and all of that is a game to play. And you have to have the right people helping you play that game.
Well, and yeah, so that's what I was going to say is that the owners I've spoken to is like, okay, CPA firm, you can't qualify. But the ones I've talked to, like, well, you might qualify for QSBS. It's 5 years, but you also got to make sure that, to your point, that the taxes that you're going to pay for the C Corp don't offset what you're going to get when you sell. And so, like, it's a question that
sometimes it's better, right? Like if you're a business that is not taking money out, you have a bunch of money, you make a bunch of money, but it's always reinvested. A C Corp's better because you're not paying the pass-through tax to the owner. It's just the 21% rate reinvest. But if you're distributing all the money, it's going to crush you on taxes relative to a different structure.
Right. And so that's why I'm always like, hey, you might qualify, but you need to talk to someone about the taxes because it's great to sell for a few $1,000,000 or not pay taxes when you sell in a few years. But until then, you got to figure out what you're going to do. And because again, I can't say enough, the game that you're playing. And I think that entrepreneurship is so great because there's so many ways you can play it. And I wonder how many owners kind of realize, and I think the younger generation, not that I'm 41, so not that I'm young, but younger, like my dad's generation, when he was in business, they kind of just, you built a business and then you close it down. Like now we're playing, now there's all these advice on all these games, but also that comes with a lot of scams too. There's a lot of people out there giving advice that's not really good advice. So how do you vet who's giving good tax advice or investing advice? Because man, you get on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, you can make $1 billion overnight by this, a Wyoming LLC is a big thing or whatever it is.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of, I wouldn't say fake information online, but there's a lot that's missing, right? So like they'll tell you like, oh, if you just go S Corp, you're going to save $15,000 in self-employment taxes. But they're like, oh, but you didn't realize that, okay, well, now your reduction of qualified business income deduction, you've reduced what can go into retirement accounts, you've added taxes or added, maybe potentially added taxes if you're New York City or Tennessee, blah, 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 right? So they might give you one part of the truth. And then when you build it all in, you're like, okay, actually that doesn't end up being true. So what I always advise is like, I put everything out for free. I have 200 plus podcasts. I have all my content on Twitter. You can find somebody who knows what they're talking about by actually reading and seeing, right? I generally stay away from people who do one thing, right? So that person might be like, I just help you on this tax thing. It's like, oh, so I give you 100K and somehow you now it's 500K and it's a donated software and you help me just on that. It's like, generally the best tax people are going to help you evaluate all tax tools that exist and then connect you to somebody, but you never want to go to somebody who's like, this is all we do is, conservation easements, or we do these software tax schemes or blah, 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 because they're selling one thing, right? And so then they'll say you'll ask for, okay, can you give me any tax policy to prove this one in an audit? And they're like, no, but we'll defend you in an audit. It's like, yeah, you really need to be careful in the way that you go down. If something sounds way too good to be true, it generally is.
Well, yeah, and I think I was talking to a tax attorney one time, and he was bemoaning some of the people who were big tax influencers, and he was, I think if I remember correctly, he was saying kind of what you're saying. It's not that what they're saying is technically true. It's just that they're not giving you nearly the nuance you need to kind of copy that advice. Because if you copy only what the video says, you're gonna get in trouble probably. There's ways you could do it, but it takes a lot more steps, and so that's the thing. And it's a tough problem because marketers know how to attract us, whether it's for taxes or business or whatever, and that's the kind of stuff that attracts us. The get rich quick, as much as we hate on it, that's actually what people want. It's odd, but that's what we want. We want to invest quick and get rich quick. That's what we want.
Yep. I mean, everybody wants it, and that's normally where most people fail.
Okay. All right. So who is, people listening find this, who's the best type of person to reach out to you? I know you said you do owners and W-2s, but who's kind of your sweet spot, if you will?
Yeah, generally I would say we're mostly business owners. Like we just ended up with, like, I had, a SpaceX client who's worth, 9 figures plus, and he's referred me to a lot of SpaceX people. But generally who we enjoy working with the most is business owners. A lot of these SpaceX people are now business owners though too. So
Yeah.
that's a little different, but it's generally business owners who are somewhat far along, right? Like they're not in their first couple years and
Yeah.
not, making much money, because, what we do is, what's unique is most RIAs are like, you can only work with me if you have AUM, and it has to be, $2 million of AUM. And it makes sense, right? Because we know on an average business owner, we spend 30 to 40 hours a year on that with among our team. So we can't charge $2,000. So everybody has to pay at least $18,000 a year as our minimum. We help on all the financial planning, the tax planning, coordinating with their team, hiring their team, investments, blah, blah, blah. So, I would never want to charge a business owner making 250 grand, 18K a year, because it's not where they're at. So generally it's, you could be a business with quite a bit of revenue, but profits in the 500K or so to the, going to the owner. Generally it's kind of the million plus in personal income is where it really, really, really starts to make sense. One, because your time is super valuable, and that's, not an expensive cost in your business. And two, there's just so much planning and value that can be had as those numbers start to get really, really big. So we tend to specialize in that area of people who just want everything done for them: investment management, financial planning, tax planning, help on the business advice side of things, et cetera.
Awesome. Okay. Awesome. Well, we will link to allstarwealth.com is the website, correct?
Yeah, allstreetwealth.com.
All Street. Oh, I got my glasses on. I can't read. All Street.
No, you're good.
I thought it was All Star. Okay. Allstreetwealth.com. And then,
You're
of
good.
course, your X handle. It was so great to have you on, man. It was great to connect, and glad we got to do this.
Yeah, me too, man. Appreciate it. Love talking about this stuff and helping other business owners.